Measure BB, I don't know if you guys are aware that it's coming down the pipe, but it's a transportation tax that we currently have a 0.5% sales tax that's supposed to expire in about 8 years. Well, the brilliant bureaucrats here in Alameda County have decided that with some help from the state, that they would like to increase our taxes for us to make it even more expensive for us to live here, right? So part of the background on this is there was a plan that many of us fought a couple of years ago called Measure B1, where they were just trying to get a 0.5% sales tax added to our tax rolls forever, in perpetuity. And it lost, and they thought that, well, if we just try to do it for 30 years and just double it, instead of just doing the 0.5%, maybe people will bite it a little bit better this time. We'll throw a lot of gifts inside for everybody so everybody gets a little. Then we'll get this thing through. And so one of the things that we've done is we've done crazy things, like actually read some of the propaganda associated with Measure BB, and we found out that it's not what it's purported to be. It is a 1% sales tax, and it's going to affect all of Alameda County. And so we'll get back to it toward the end, but our position is, instead of taking a tax, doubling it, extending it for 30 years, and having it not effective anyway, why don't we take advantage of that 8 extra years that we have and plan something that will actually benefit the citizens that are being wrung out of their tax dollars? And so we'll talk to you a little bit about why this is a bad thing, not only from an environmental perspective, but an economic perspective and many other perspectives. But so what's happening is this is going to push a lot of the cities in Alameda County up to 9.5%. Some as high as 10% or more, especially if some of the other sales tax hikes that are on the ballot are implemented and voted in. We, like I said, did vote it down in the past, and they're coming for us again. But just to give you perspective, New York City is known for high taxes being expensive to live and do business. Their sales tax is about 8.75%, so we will be even higher here, and California will be one of the highest in, or Alameda County will be one of the highest in the states. For those of you who are faith-based, God only asks for 10%. Alameda County is asking for more when combined with the state. That's probably bad news. But anyway, the real issue is that if we hold these people to their own rules, this doesn't solve the transportation problem. If we're going to pay for something for 30 years, many of us believe, oddly enough, that it should solve the problem that we're being taxed for. We'll talk about the economic, environmental, lifestyle issues associated with this and how it's detrimental, but it's just blatantly disingenuous when they're talking about wanting to help or wanting to solve some of these issues. Specifically, those of us here in the Tri-Valley area, since most of the money is going to be going to Oakland, it really redistributes the wealth that we work hard to generate here and our businesses try to generate here, and shoves it over the hill where even Oakland residents acknowledge it will be squandered. So one of the things that's important to those of us here in the Tri-Valley is things like reducing traffic, making sure we have decent roads to ride on. But interestingly, the roads are one of the lowest priorities. They get less than 9% of the actual tax dollars. The $7.8 billion that they're looking to raise, only a small percentage goes to the roads. It won't improve traffic, and in fact, what they're talking about is as this goes through, by the end of the 30-year cycle, the vehicle miles traveled in cars will actually increase by 46%. So, strike one in a big way. Greenhouse gases, for those of you who are environmentally minded, you would recognize that there's 46% more vehicle miles being traveled. That equates to more greenhouse gas emissions and higher carbon footprints, for those of you who are concerned about that. But AC Transit, which is the largest benefactor of this, of the $7.8 billion, they get close to $2 billion of it. They're not required to improve their services, streamlining their routes. What they're going to do with it is probably bring on some more buses that aren't full anyway, and then restore some of the routes that were underutilized when they were there before with that additional money. And the sad part is, I said a little bit earlier, everyone gets a little something, but not enough to do anything important. It's like being in the desert for 3 days coming in, you're parched, your lips are cracked and bleeding, and someone hands you a shot glass and says, here you go. It's not going to be enough to get you back to sustaining yourself, but that's the approach that this tax is taking. Economically, when you talk about doubling a tax, you are indeed eroding people's spending power. Even a half a penny here and there starts to add up, especially for those who are middle class or poor or on fixed incomes, like many of the seniors that are in our communities. So, since it is a regressive tax and it makes us one of the highest taxes in the state and in the country, we're saying maybe we should take a deeper look at it. From the environmental perspective, I did hit a little bit on the 46% increase. The problem is that even with, for example, things like adding BART stations or adding infill stations and that kind of thing, one of the things that BART seems to be opposed to is building parking. So people, if you can't walk to your BART station, you're not really going to end up taking that many cars off the road. Any of you try to take BART in Pleasanton after 10 a.m.? Well, you get up until about 9 a.m. you can take it. And then at 10 o'clock to 10:08, you can take it again because that's when those extra parking spaces open up. But if you haven't got it before 9 or between 10 and 10:08, you're not taking BART that day, is what most people find. So if you only have 2,000 parking spaces or something like that, you're only taking 2,000 cars off the road. The millions that roll around in the Bay Area, you're not making an appreciable difference or making it easier for people to get out of the car. And the sad thing is, over the last 25 years that they've had this tax that they've been extracting from our sales taxes anyway, ridership on public transportation is down. So they want more money for less riders, more out of your pocket so they can prepay whatever it is that gets paid on these things. In many cases, chosen contractors, etc. But as I said, it doesn't do anything to improve greenhouse gas emissions over the 30 years anyway. With less spending power, they figure, well, we better promise people something. Let's tell them that we'll generate another 150,000 jobs. Well, that's great. Over a 30-year span, that equals out to 5,000 jobs a year, most of which are part-time. And what we need are good-paying, long-term jobs for our citizens, not placating them with pie and lollipops and visions of unicorns. But the transit agencies are not even going to improve the process or make it easier for people to ride anyway, which is one of the reasons people don't use public transportation, is that it's not convenient. If you value your time, why would you decide that you're going to take a mode of transportation that takes you 4 times as long to get where you're going? And if you do, that means 4 times the amount of time that you're not in the community that you love, you're not with the people you love, you're not really enjoying an improvement lifestyle. But going back to the reason that you're here, densification, many of the dollars that are associated, and I'll show you what I mean in a moment, require densification in order to get the transportation funds anyway. Otherwise, like Charlie Brown and Lucy playing football, they can pull the prize away from us and we end up on our backs. And we don't even get a soft landing because our wallets are down empty. There are lots of weasel words and escape clauses in the legislation or in the marketing propaganda associated with it. And as a marketer, I call marketing materials propaganda affectionately. But this is really more borderline traditional propaganda in many cases. There are only a few big winners, or a couple big winners. Most of them are Oakland and AC Transit. And we're told, though, that don't worry, there's a watchdog, a citizen watchdog committee, who will make sure that everything's okay. Interestingly, the Citizen Watchdog Committee is the same one that's on the ballot argument in favor, saying that they all approve it currently. And some of us in the room, and even others that we know outside the room, were told that we might be able to get jobs on that watchdog committee as well, if we would support the sales tax. And so that seems to us more like a political payback as opposed to transparency. And even the reports that they generate, the information they are given is from county staff who gives them what they want to give them. The audits and the reports are all gone through by staff, and the presentations are developed by staff. Sounds kind of like muddy transparency to me. The bio agrees. let me just take one example that's near and dear to all of our hearts. I'm in Livermore. Many of you are here in Pleasanton, right? And you guys would like to see, and including your mayor and city council, would love to see BART go to Livermore. Why? Because you don't want to be the end of the line, because that's where all the parking comes, right? So in Livermore, we're thinking we want it so we can get people to the outlets, or we can get people back and forth. As long as there are no more than 2,000 of them, I think we'll be okay with the parking situation and everything. But if you read the actual verbiage, there is $400 million promised to Livermore BART. And it's being proposed as this is going to bring BART to Livermore until you actually read the fine detail. And that is, this is just for the first phase of the alignment to Isabel Avenue. But it's going to be using the most effective and efficient technologies. Now, funds for construction of this first phase cannot begin until the whole thing is funded. Estimates are ranging between $1.2 billion and $3.2 billion for bringing BART to Livermore. $400 million is only a portion of the way there. So, in and of itself, that starts to make you raise at least one eyebrow. If you go deeper into it, and you see that there are project-specific environmental clearances that are needing to be attained, and are most of you familiar with what an environmental impact report is? Okay. Now, in a traditional sense, you would expect you want to make sure that you're not contaminating groundwater or any of that, right? But in their case, what they're also getting toward is you need to make sure that all of the other possible alternatives, such as using electric trains, or using shuttles, or using something else to get people to Pleasanton BART, would be more effective than actually putting a BART train out to Livermore. So there's that, and this is where it gets back into that densification kind of a scenario. You look at all the fundable and feasible alternatives, and they have to be consistent with mandates, policies, and guidance of federal, state, and regional agencies that have jurisdiction over environmental and project development process. What that means is, some of you are familiar with Plan Bay Area. Well, Plan Bay Area would reward compliant communities that would build high-density housing with 30 or more units with 30 or more units per acre with special treatment. So, for example, they waive some of the, or they call it streamline. It means waive some of the requirements that would impact the environment. Okay, so that means if you are doing a favored project and you're a favored provider of this, you get around the rules, you get things done more quickly. You don't have to go over the obstacles that normal people would to get projects done. And what that means is Livermore and Pleasanton don't have typically 30 unit per acre housing, right? But we've dealt with the social justice groups in Oakland that they come through and they see Pleasanton. If you don't have high enough density housing, right? You don't have enough disadvantaged people in your neighborhoods, which leads to subsidized housing. And as I was saying before the meeting, they also complain heavily about the gentrification and the increase in the income gap. Well, what this type of policy does is it makes it so that only the wealthy and people who qualify for subsidies can afford housing, because developers aren't going to leave money on the table. Landlords aren't going to leave money on the table. If the government's giving a percentage of the rent, they're going to take everything they can get. It's good business, right? But what it does is it drives up the price of everything. So the middle class is put out. Guess what? If there's no middle class, there's a bigger gap between the poor and the wealthy, and you've just increased gentrification with the very policies that you said would remove it. Wrong answer. So really what this is about putting our suburban tax dollars in other parts of Alameda County in control of urban bureaucrats who tend to squander it. So even though we're all taxed, Oakland and AC Transit are the ones that get all of the, or the chunk of the money. But even they, like I said, are complaining that their streets won't be fixed. And guess what? What causes those potholes in the streets in the first place? Heavy trucks and heavy buses. Right? So more buses on streets with less funding to maintain them, worse streets too. I'm not an urban planner, but it doesn't seem like it makes sense. So what we face when we say, okay, great, well this tax is less than ideal. Great. Well, instead of just poking holes in it, what would you do? how would you solve the problem? First order of business is let's go back to the drawing board. We have 8 more years. Let's use another couple, 4, 6, all 8 if we need to. Now here's a challenge. That one of the reasons that they want to get this done in 8 years is because Bob Wykowski and Ellen Corbett actually went to the state because they had this little problem. We were already at our tax ceiling in Alameda and Contra Costa County. They couldn't tax us high enough to get this done. So they were able to pass legislation. We got a special exemption here in Alameda and in Contra Costa County so that they could raise our taxes higher. So they've got to get it done before that exemption expires. It's very nice of them, right, to make sure that we could have the spruce protected a little bit more. But the reality is we think that we should be increasing viable transportation choices. We're not anti-transportation. We're just pro-transportation that works. And especially if we can hold them accountable for their own rules, like I said, and reduce the greenhouse gas emissions and the carbon footprint. If it's easier and more convenient to take our cars to someplace, to leave our cars at home, to go someplace other than San Francisco, we might do it more often. Right? But that's why most of us use Sparks and Tri-Valley just to get to the city because it's more painful to drive. But what we're saying is let's look for projects, even if we have to pay more for an individual project, let's make sure that it gets done right. And that it actually solves a problem as opposed to just exacerbating things, and make sure it's good for Alameda County as a whole. But there's one other concept that I want to share with you, and that is that 25% of it is going to go to, or 20% is going to go to AC Transit. Why not just have AC Transit stand on its own in its jurisdiction, let its ridership weigh its merit on its own, and go from there.